I see a problem. I don't know if I want to call it a problem, George, but I don't know if that's quite how to describe it. But you and I are going to be trying to communicate about something that we both know about. But it's not something we know intellectually. We're not trying to communicate something that people can grasp with knowledge. But we're going to be using words. And at times I think it's going to seem like we're talking about something that the intellect can grasp. So that's a real big challenge for us, is to try to point in a direction where knowledge can't go.
Well, to communicate. I mean, that's the key why we're doing this here, is to have the conversation, to communicate through this videos that someone else might be able to listen to and get past the conceptualization. Because when this awakens in someone, the conceptualization of it doesn't matter. You know, the words that we're using, it doesn't really matter. You know, life is moving, and that's just it. So we're kind of going out on a limb here to try and verbalize, you know, the unspeakable, and we know that already. So what type of clarity can we bring to the conversation that someone listening to it doesn't get bound in the words and sees some more of the simplicity of the very simplistic message, past the words, but we're going to be stuck in the words.
We need to get beyond the words with people somehow. And you know, we're talking about an observational skill, and I think that tracking brings us there immediately. Because, like, when you take somebody out in the forest and you start to show them all the things you see, there's so much there they have never seen. Their eyes are open. All of a sudden, the forest is speaking to them, and they're awed by how much they haven't seen. Right? So, tracking brings to the forefront the fact that we're missing things sometimes. When that person comes out of the forest, they go like, wow, I don't believe I was missing all of that. Well, there's a lot of stuff we're not seeing, not only out there in the environment and in the forest, but also inwardly. And to me, that's what it's all about. It's about observation. And that observation ultimately could possibly, whatever we mean by that, again, it's not a concept. We need to go beyond the words with some observational skills, not personal skills, but observational skills.
And that's kind of what I feel tracking has this opportunity to have openness kind of be present. It's tricky to say. It's always present, but it is an opportunity to show how it's emerging in the opportunity with the track that one is with. I'm sure you've had instances in the years you've been teaching tracking, and for myself, where we come into a situation, even myself, not being flexible within my observations, or with another student or person I'm working with, they're dead set on what that is based on their prior experiences, and I come with a set of experiences, and we're talking through our experiences about what it is we're seeing, but it's there. We're not seeing the same thing. Within that process, something can easily switch to it not actually being about the track anymore, more just about my idea of what I think it is being the more important thing. It's not as much about really getting to the truth of hearing what the person's saying. It becomes more about
and not being wrong.
Yes, it becomes more about one's own image and idea of oneself. Right? And in that small little instance, there's a lot there. in terms of the potential human condition of how we're operating, not just around this track,
Yeah.
but right out into our lives.
Yeah, there's a
in
lot
general.
there just to learn about ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities, as you know, George, when you're out in the field. One comes to mind, you know, I've got probably 12 students with me, and we're on a sandy shore on the shore of Quabbin. And there's these lines in the sand, nice sweeping lines in the sand. And I asked people, I says, okay, so what made those lines? Are those some kind of track, some kind of sign, some kind of animal moved through here and left those lines? And people started to, you know, your brains start going. The thought process starts to burn rubber, if you will. And they're all trying to figure it out. And it's amazing what the thought process can make out of that. One person had a hawk swooping down, but there were some little mouse tracks nearby, right? So the person put the mouse tracks nearby with these lines in the sand, and it ended up for that person being a hawk that swooped down to get the mouse, and its wingtips touched the sand. And I said, and I'm trying to point out, well, your mind is racing. You're not observing. Just observe. With a quiet mind, just look at it. It will speak to you. You know, if you just observe. The observation is the learning. Your mind's going too fast, and it's stopping you from observing. And then somebody else had the ideas that came up. Every once in a while, the wind would come in, right? And then a good little breeze came in, and the wind took some grasses and swept it across those lines ever so neatly, and it was so clear what was making those lines. All they had to do was just some patience, observe, and it would come to them. You know, so tracking does have all these opportunities to show us how thought has limitations. Thought can get in the way of observation. Doesn't have to, but it sure can. So that's one small example.
Right. Just do that one little instance of the track.
Right.
Seeing it differently.
Right.
And I think what I saw you doing when I was going out in the field with you a lot, but particularly with other students, you would take advantage of that situation to bring it to people's attention, you know, to bring that awareness to people of what's not only happening with the track and what we think about discussing the track, but what is it really? Because there's that piece. But then what is actually happening internally? And maybe this is where you kind of brought, and you'll have to speak to this, but there is a word that trackers use discussed as inner tracking, right? But what is inner tracking?
Sure. What's in the tracking? You know, it's like almost like tracking a bobcat or any other animal. And if you track a bobcat long enough, and you're really present with that life, with that animal, and you move through the forest with it, and you see how it moves and how it hunts, and you become incredibly intimate with that life. As you become intimate with that life, you realize that life is not separate from everything around it. It's affecting the whole forest, the whole ecosystem. And the whole ecosystem, the quality of the river, the forest, is affecting this animal. So what you're becoming intimate with is the web of life, and ultimately you realize that this animal is also affecting your life, and you're affecting its life. It's all connected. So there's another animal, and that is self, that we can track. And that is the most cunning animal that we'll probably ever track. And probably the most frightening experience is to track that animal and come to face with who it really is. When you come face to face with that, boy, and that's going to change your life. And that's where I like to bring people ultimately into tracking experiences, is to track that animal, the self. What is it really? You know, like we go into the forest and you bring a person into the forest and they begin to realize that there's a lot of stuff that they're missing, that they're not seeing. And you would like to bring them inwardly as well, and let them have that experience for themselves, that inwardly there's a lot of things they're just not seeing. It's amazing how much we're not seeing. And when our eyes, not our personal eyes, it's more than that, but when we see who we really are, something changes dramatically. And once that changes for you, as it has for you, George, and for me, everything you do, in our case, I was teaching tracking, you're teaching tracking. To share that with another, whatever it is you're doing becomes sort of a vehicle to ultimately do that. And that's what ninja tracking is to me, is to share intimately who we really are. Mm-hmm. To discover the faults of who we think we are and the truth of who we think we are, which is beyond all this thinking stuff which we were talking about previously, right?
What is it that we say that is threatening or scary? What is it targeting? Because someone might just listen to it and not even understand what we're talking about. And it doesn't become scary or threatening because it hasn't really addressed anything maybe at a core level that is being threatened at that point. So what is being threatened? What becomes scary to that person?
Yeah. This is what comes to mind to me when you say what's scary. Well, the general thinking inwardly for most human beings is that I'm a something, I'm who I am, and I have control over my thought process. I am thinking these thoughts. I have awareness. I'm in control of how much awareness I have and don't have, and maybe if I listen to George and Paul, I can get more of it. This intelligence, this is my intelligence. I have intelligence, I have awareness, and I have this thought process, and I'm in control of all this. I'm responsible, I have to make the right decisions, do the right things, yada, yada, yada. Maybe that's not true. Maybe there's no one there who has awareness, who is in control of the thought process. That could be, well, you mean I don't exist the way I think I exist?
Well, it's directly addressing one's identity of who they associate and who they think they are. So it's really addressing who one thinks one is and the control they have over that. So to target that and address that is the thing that they're clinging on to for survival,
right,
in the world. So, and that's a lot. I mean, that's one's whole concept and one's whole identity of who one thinks one is.
There's this personal awareness that I have, my own personal. You have your awareness.
Right.
This is the way people think, right? You have your awareness and I have my awareness. I have my own personal awareness. Well, you know, just a suggestion, maybe something for people to inquire into, is maybe it's not like that at all. And in hanging on to your own personal awareness, you're separating yourself and alienating yourself and pushing away a universal awareness that is in all beings. But when that comes in, there will be no more personal awareness that you can identify with, feel proud of, or whatever, or not have enough of, or whatever. So what's left is just openness. Just, there's no attachments to being anything or even a universal self or anything. There's just openness.
Right. Which is scary for something like a self that wants to have control and attachment around something to identify with, right?
Right. There's nothing left.
Right.
But in that nothing, there's everything.
Right.
But that's a hard one to understand, but, you know.
There's something that comes to mind there is it sounds funny, but rather than us owning it, it owns us. It's just a play on words. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. Awareness is being me. Awareness is having me. It's not me who is having an aware moment. Mm-hmm. That is arising in awareness. The whole idea of me, I just, a light went off in my head, is going off in the light. You know?
So, you know, another thing you brought up there is, I think people can get caught on the idea of to track the self. What does that mean, to track the self? Because there's a lot of ideas around that could sound like you're tracking an animal. Something is following and watching very specifically what comes up. In the terms of outer tracking, well, that's easy. We're following, we're observing, we're looking at things, we're paying more attention. You know, there's some control element to that. To track inwardly, to track one's inward self. Who's doing the tracking?
Right. So the whole concept of someone doing the inner tracking, right? You're going to track yourself. You're going to track the self. Well, what is that except the self that's tracking the self? Mm-hmm. So now you've divided yourself into a self that is tracking the self. So did you see that? Was there an awareness of that while that was happening? That awareness that didn't come from anywhere, that awareness that wasn't something that you were doing, but all of a sudden you discover yourself tracking yourself. There's a discovery, there's a light that goes off. That to me is the awareness that I'm trying to get to. It's not a personal awareness. It's not an awareness we have control over. It's not an awareness of and possessed by self. Something else is coming in there that's waking us up to who we are, waking us up, keeping us open.
Maybe we should back out a little bit and go back to kind of everyday normal life whatever that means, right? But how does this? How does what we're describing? How does it change anybody? I mean, how does that change things? And we look at change as it being something that's happened and shifted with some. Maybe nothing's changed. Okay, so let's not. But it might feel as if something has changed. But really, maybe nothing has. Okay. But it's certainly the person is operating it differently than the way that they were. So before we painted a picture of the scary part for someone, right? What's threatened, right? We talked about the identity. Let's say we've come all the way to this place that we've just come to. Someone sees this at the level you were just describing internally. What's then different? Because something is different, or something has changed, or something that was always there might just, the light is emerged, or is not as clouded, right? So what has changed?
I think we can talk about that.
Yeah, right. I mean, because it would make more sense for someone to see that there's this threatened thing, and now all of a sudden something is different.
Okay, so here I am, a regular person, right? And I have awareness, I have intelligence, and I'm happening, and I'm observing the happening and trying to have control over what's happening. And that whole life is a life of division, the need for control and power over. I might be identified with some ideological principle that I think is going to save humanity, or I might be involved in some belief system and some God that's going to save us all. And there's a division there. There's conflict. There's what's happening, what I think should be happening, what I think shouldn't be happening. I'm living a life of division and conflict and authoritarian principles that have their ideas of how things should be and shouldn't be. The whole world's in conflict because of that. We're killing each other because of that. All of a sudden, there is a scene that comes in unasked for and just destroys that. There's just a seeing it for what it is. There's a seeing all its limitations. The person can no longer now be attached to those ideological principles. Then the person can no longer be attached to the separate self that's attached to those principles. There's a quantum change. Now the person is no longer contributing to all these divisive belief systems and principles. The person is now open. And the person's security now, without even thinking about it, lies in openness, not some ideological, rigid, authoritarian principle that is violent and needs control over to work. So we live in this environment where we need control over and power to have security, yada yada. All of a sudden now, what's secure, we see what security is not in that. We've become completely aware of the fact there's no security in being identified with that stuff. It's the opposite. All of a sudden now security is openness. When everybody's open, there will probably be far more security in this world than we can imagine. We don't live in that kind of something that we're trying to point to, I think.
Is this an experience that someone's going to have, and then they're going to go and walk away, and it was an experience, and that was it? does something radically shift within someone that doesn't really change? Is there a touching something that doesn't really change, that's not interpreted as an experience? You know, it's past it's past an experience. Something's moving and connected to the source of one's life, in essence, that isn't based on the experience that one has. Although experiences are connected and arising within this, I guess I'm just trying to target and address specifically experience and how it is relating and connecting to what we're describing. People will look for an experience or for something like this to happen to them and feel like, did I get it or did I not get it? And did I have an experience that did it? And it's still the same questioning tail chasing itself around. So is what we're describing an experience?
Right. So you can have, anything can happen, a spiritual experience of the most profound kind is happening, and we can only know it happened in context of the history.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're trying to point to is something that is not happening. This is so difficult. That is the light and energy for the happening. Now, anything I say in that realm is not going to be accurate, because we can't talk about this in an accurate way. So one has to come to this not through the happening, but from the very source itself. The very source itself has to come in and reveal what's happening. If we're trying to see what's really happening from the happening, we're dividing the happening and we're not seeing the whole picture. So the source of the happening needs to come in so we can see that whole picture. As long as we're involved in trying to see the picture, we're creating a division in the happening, and we can't really understand what's really going on. We think we understand what's going on, but it's fragmented, and we don't know it's fragmented until the source comes in and goes, whoa, then your life's changed. There's where we're trying to get. That has to happen for that person. We can't, nobody can do it for them. And when that happens, they'll know it.
So you described a picture there of a person kind of running the normal life of association of identity, and then all of a sudden we come to this point, seeing comes in. Okay? What stimulates that? Okay, so at that moment it's yes. So is that going to... It's certainly possible for it to come in just driving to work one day, or is there something that precedes that, or is there things associated with that coming in? Is it questions that one proposes to start the ball rolling? Or is it really just, seeing comes in? Do you follow where I'm going with that?
Yes, every time somebody tries to do something about it, they're substantiating their separateness and their power and control over. They're trying to exercise power and control over, which is antithetical to what could come in.
Mm-hmm. For the person who's not involved in this conversation, is this going to emerge on its own, or is there? And I think this is why there's so many practices and tools and, and different ways to bring this conversation to one's awareness. Even if they begin to associate with it, try to grasp onto this as the new thing, because that's what they've always done. Is there some value to the conversation for someone who's totally green to this? Or is the conversation itself just setting up a new ideology for someone to shoot for?
Right, so there's a danger here when we talk about something, some openness is going to come in and enlighten us. It starts to look like a thing that somebody's going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And then people start to want it, which all contributes to separateness and reinforces the whole notion of self, control over, etc. So that's the danger when we talk about something that can come in and enlighten us to who we truly are. I don't know how to get around that except point to it like we just did. Mm-hmm. We're pointing to what can become a problem in this.
Well, here's another look. I guess I just keep pointing out pitfalls.
Yeah.
Because there's another thing that we'll associate that's always pointing out the problem. You know, the new problem that I can basically do the things that I've enjoyed to do because that will create a new structure and a new identity. Let's talk about the tracker, for instance, right? I'm still a tracker. I still call myself a tracker. Is that the identity of really who I am, right? You know, it certainly could take on the form of an identity, sure. But for me it doesn't. But I can still enjoy and love the passion of learning about tracking and doing tracking.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a pitfall to be calling myself a tracker. But you see, it's easy for someone to hear what you're saying and think that anything that someone associates with that they're interested in, photography or whatever they want to do, all of a sudden we can't do those things, or that's creating an identity. That's creating a new identity of association.
Yep.
A new watchdog is in place to disidentify with things, right, and actively go out to not identify with anything.
Right. Start thinking you shouldn't belong to any groups.
Right.
Start thinking you shouldn't think of yourself in certain ways. That's all the same game, right?
Right.
You know, you belong to the group of people who don't belong to groups. You know.
So that's another. It's just another pointing to another way that an identity and thought can take on a new idea of we can't identify and associate with these things, which continues to move further away from just being. Right, just being, not trying to be, but just being. So in hearing you speak, that's kind of what came to mind, and the identity of, for me specifically, in the conversation we're having about tracking, mm-hmm, and being trackers, how it really doesn't seem to matter what one calls oneself. Eventually, it doesn't really seem to matter in terms of creating identity if the process of creating identity is all worked out.
Yeah, and at some point, you know, we like to think that, like for instance, if, I'm not sure where this is going, but if I start to get this idea, or I think I'm enlightened, and I'm beyond anger,
Mm-hmm.
that's an identity. And then all of a sudden, a trigger's pulled inside, and I find myself angry. All of a sudden, the world is coming down on me. I shouldn't be angry. That's not who I am. And I'm really upset with myself. What did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong. It must, you know. So all that comes into play when we're identified and when we're self-concerned. Even if we're identified as being spiritual or whatever, it all can come down to fear, control, yada yada. But what can happen if a person is awake, and I don't know if it does us any good to talk about this, but it's coming up now. Anger, say anger, a person is awake to the true nature of who they are. And anger does come in. And it doesn't mean it isn't going to come in. It can come in. And, well, what happens then? Is the person angry at themselves for being angry? Or is there just anger? Is there just the instrument of life, the dynamics of life, the neurology kicked in a certain way because certain old buttons were pushed, and all of a sudden there's anger. And you know what? There's no anger with the anger. It is just moving. It's moving through. It's just the nature of the beast, the nature of the animal. I'm not fighting the anger. I don't have any control over the anger. There's nothing to do about the anger except to embrace it, but not even embrace it. There's nothing to do with it. It just moves. And there's a letting, there's an openness to it. There's openness and just moves through. That's really different.